Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, we're gonna try that one more time. I think it's better. Thumbs up. I'm seeing some microphone sound on my setup here, so I think I'm gonna assume it's okay. Thank you so much for telling me. Really appreciate it. All right. Okay. So as I was saying, this is going to be the second of 3 hour long sessions on this little shoreline painting. And if you have questions along the way, please feel free to post them in the chat. I'll check in a couple of times and just make sure I'm kind of addressing anything. Also, if you just want to see anything more closely, I'll do my best to accommodate. So today, I'll be starting out by using what I always refer to as like a drawing mixture of paint. So when I'm first coming back in for working on a painting after it's dry, I want to start with some like little dark marks to kind of reinforce the drawing, make any changes that I need to see, corrections. There we go. I'm going to use my Terp for this. And I'm just using that clean enough layer at the top. And I'm putting that Terp kind of out on the palette. And you can see mixing into that what just looks like a pile of black paint is actually really colorful. So as we thin that out and show that a little bit more, you can kind of tell what color you're working with. That's like a deep blue-green, and I think that's really perfect for what I wanted to start drawing into. I'm going to use this. Have a little bit more Terp on the brush for below. And this color was like a Prussian blue with like a burnt umber, by the way. So what I find pretty and interesting and kind of something I want to capture in this image are all of these little waveforms and all of these little color areas through here. There's a really cool kind of rhythm of these light and dark shapes, lots of angles. It's really dynamic. I don't intend to copy this, but just to get some inspiration from the reference, which I'm so trying my best to hold out of the way and not shove up in front of the painting. I will continue to try, but let me put it up here, kind of next to it so I don't have to hold it. All right. So here's where I'm thinking, I'm observing what's in the reference, but I'm also thinking about like what's going to work in the painting. I really want to focus on, what's most important. And it is not that I absolutely duplicate the reference that I'm using for this picture. I want to go a little more purple in this color, non sequitur, but I'm going to switch to ultramarine blue here. Here we go. All right, so yeah, the most important thing is not that I duplicate this reference because it's not like a commission of someone's favorite surfing spot or something. I don't know. You would surf there, right? I'm sure people do. But it is not, that's not the primary concern that I have here. I just really want to, what I'm seeing that I find interesting that I want to incorporate into an artwork or into a painting, these shapes of color, the way that they kind of lock together, there's directional lines. It's just a really interesting visual situation that I think you can take this reference and you can make it into, whatever you want. It doesn't have to be exactly what's there, but I think most important is to like respond to what you see in the reference that's worth painting. So when you ignore something, it shouldn't be because you can't paint it. It should be because it's not important to you. And then you just have to choose to ignore the right things and continue to ignore the right things because those things oh, so often, like we'll be looking at a reference photo and we find, and saying we because I'm talking about like students here at the studio, we'll be looking at like an object or an issue in the photograph, and we might find that it's really, when it comes down to it, is even necessary to include that information. So just make sure you are including information that is useful to your end goal. Now, about this mixture of paint. I am using a very, very thin mixture of paint, but it is not extremely wet or drippy or liquid. It is thin, but it is somewhat dry. So it can be both of those things. There's thin and very liquidy, very wet, and there is thin and a little bit more dry. And that is the optimal consistency, and it is super important. The consistency of the paint is a really, really critical thing to consider, especially, if you're working in oil, but for almost any material, that's going to hold true. Watercolor, absolutely important. Everything is transparent when you add enough water or turp or medium to it. So going through those stages, it is often best to start with your more transparent mixtures of paint. Now, last week I made this big compositional line, and I see kind of why I did. I like it. I don't want to lose that too much. And I want to kind of echo it over here. So that's here. There's just this sort of like flow of those shapes that cuts across. All right. I'm going to switch over to a bigger brush and just cover a little bit more ground in a transparent way before I go on, because this is a very big painting and I better get moving on it to pace this the way that I want to pace it. Now, I do want to say also that, like, I feel like, yes, I'm pacing this very, very specifically because I'm committing to doing this on camera for 3 weeks. But even if I were not doing this on camera, I would really try and at least set some kind of like intentional pace for the picture that I'm going to be painting. You don't want it to just like go on forever. So decide if it's a quick study, decide if it's like a, kind of 3 or 4 session studio piece maybe, or maybe it's something even longer. Just having that intention so that it just doesn't turn into this open-ended, like, I'll just start painting and see where it goes. Not that that is always wrong. However, just find it may not be as productive or as like fruitful as it is when you kind of plan the duration of your picture. Right, so here's a nice dark color. And getting into these like zigzag and it comes this way. And I'm going to change up the color a little bit. I don't want to have this too filled in. Although I kind of want to go back through here and like really palette knife over some of this. So I'm not going to fill it up too much, but I just want to give it like a little bit more of the character of color that I'm seeing. So my plan today is, we'll see how close I stick to this plan. Ready? I'm going to say it out loud. My plan today is to do a little layer to the water. I'm going to come back through more paint in the sky, more paint in the mountains, the coastline, and then back into the water for a little bit of palette knife. If I can finish that in 45 minutes until we get to the end of today's session. So we'll see how this transforms. I feel like I can move pretty fast on it, so I'm going to try. It is a large picture, though. This is definitely, I mean, doesn't sound like much when I say that it's only a 16 by 20 and the last one I did was 11 by 14. It really does not sound like it would be that different, and yet it is. All right, so let's do a little bit more. Getting some color in here, a little more covered, because I feel like the paint is still looking very, very early, a little bit, you know, underdone. I just want a little bit more in this layer before we move into the sky. So I mixed a tiny bit of white into this color, and I'm holding it up to the reference. Ooh, it looks pretty good. Okay, I like it. Let's see what we can do. I'm just going to scoop up all of it, and I am pressing really hard into the palette to get that to scoop up onto the brush. And I want to just test out a little. It looks just like how I want it, actually. That's pretty nice. A little lighter, a little bit more distant. That just changes so much when you see that much paint go on. Oftentimes people have kind of problems with, like, they think the color is wrong, but it's really just that the color is not thick enough, so we can't see it. And I had that problem for years. I couldn't figure out, like, why do my colors feel so weak? And I think it was just a matter of using enough paint so that the color really has a chance to, like, look the way that it should. Just needs, there's a minimum level, a minimum volume of paint that it needs to really read. And it is frustrating at first when you put that light layer down and it's just not very vibrant. It doesn't really look the way you imagined it would look. But so much of this process is just kind of like suspending utter disappointment. You know, like, you have to know that there is an utter disappointment phase when things are under construction. It just doesn't look the way that you know you want it to look. And there's no way to get it to that point except to go through it. So I think finding ways to, you know, do more and more of the process, and don't worry about the results. Just get used to the process as much as possible. I think that really is a helpful way to think of it. Like, learning the process is the key to success in painting and drawing. If you feel like you haven't had much successful work yet, don't worry about that. Just focus more on learning the process of, like, blocking in from the general to the specific, how we go around and around. Think of it developing like a Polaroid picture, you know. So if you are just starting out and finding these like 1 hour little videos, I'm not even concerned if this painting turns out. I think it'll probably turn out okay. I kind of like it so far. We have high hopes, but if it doesn't, that's fine too. I just want to demonstrate this process for you so that you can kind of see, you know, at least what you might expect while moving through a painting process such as this, right? And like I said, a lot of it is more frustrating than you might think, and it's just because of the unfamiliarity with the process. People think, oh, it's over. It looks terrible. It'll never look okay. It's going to look okay in like 5 minutes. It's really going to look okay. That is probably my biggest perk from being an art teacher for the past 30 years and seeing people like make pictures all day long is that it does not make me panic anymore at all. I have no panic. I mean, other things make me panic for sure about painting. So don't get me wrong. I have my moments, but the process does not make me panic anymore. I kind of get how things go, and I get how, when I start to feel a little bit like uncertain about an area, my tendency is going to be to zone into that area and try to get it right and try to correct it. Working against that tendency is best because if you zone too much in one area, even if it's going a little bit off the rails, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. And the goal is really to get things to develop as gradually and as like overall in a really holistic, very, everything is integrated, everything's coming along together. So when you panic and you zone into one area trying to fix it, that often does more damage than just moving on and coming back to that in its next go around. So I'm going to say that too, but then I'll probably flail around in panic because no matter what, this is like a lifelong process of, trying to incorporate all of these things. I have lots of white areas really open in the water. Like I have plenty of space. And like I said, I really do want to get into some palette knife there later today. So I'm going to say the water is ready to sit for a moment. And then we're going to get back into the sky and just work around one more time, hopefully ending with palette knife on the water. Look, I've said my plan twice. I think I'm going to stick to my plan. All right. Again, if you're watching this video and you have not liked or commented or subscribed, while I mix this next color, I'll tell you the importance of why I ask for these little favors. I would love to take some YouTube lives on the road this summer as I go traveling for landscape painting. Whoops. And so getting to 1,000 followers, although it sounds like it might be a little bit later than this summer, I'm going to say let's go for it anyways, because what's the worst that can happen? Let's try to get to 1,000 followers so I can go live from my phone or whatever requirement I'm supposed to get to 1,000 followers for. But I do know that in order to successfully do these broadcasts live when I'm out plein air painting, it would be super helpful if I was at 1,000. So back to the color. I really started zoning out and just talking. And I think I might kind of need to start a little bit of a blue pile here. Let's get back into sky color. This is such a warm, like muted, like neutral kind of gray color that I just ended up making without thinking. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you that I have recently been considering, and that has been kind of called more into focus from doing these YouTube lives, is that like I'll say I'm going to do one thing and then I'll just start without even knowing that I'm consciously doing it. I will just start doing another thing. And at first I was rather horrified by this, but honestly, I think this is a really good example of just you have to kind of follow your intuition, and it is a process of tapping into and like trusting your intuition. Not to sound too woo-woo, but like it's true. It helps you very much in that way. And also if you do that, it helps your paintings very much. Like you can intuit so much about like what needs to happen. And I see it with students all the time. They'll change a reference and think that they made a mistake, but actually that change is way better for the picture. So I think it was just an intuitive change. It's not a mistake. So trusting those changes that you just instinctively kind of go to And maybe the thing that you just instinctively find yourself doing on your painting, like instead of saying, oh, that's wrong, I'll never know how to get through this process, you know? Look at that. I went off the rails here and now I'm on this part and I should be on that. Well, maybe that's true and that's something to consider, but at the same time, like look at like what you're actually focused on. Maybe that's going to tell you something. So if you kind of stop thinking that all of your ideas are bad ideas, right? And that you just are doing something wrong, it may benefit you because I think people just naturally do things that is very beneficial to their pictures. And like I said, all too often when that is called into focus, that's kind of seen as like a mistake, but I think it's really nice. Often that's, and not that we don't make mistakes, we often do, but I'm just saying I see that quite a bit with people kind of calling those intuitive things mistakes. So, all right, here we go into the sky. This paint is dry, crumbly, and very unpleasant feeling. So I'm going to put a little bit of this medium. This is just linseed oil and turp. Here it is. Here it is. And it's just going to like loosen up the paint just one little bit. And that feels so much better. I'm getting a little too dark there at the top. It's okay though. I'm going to go with like a little more white and maybe a little pink in the color. But I just decided to kind of go with this color and we'll see what happens. All right, carrying on. Let's adjust that color. We said lighter and a little bit more pink. So here we go. I scooped it all together. Just use whatever this is. We're gonna go lighter. And then a little quinacridone maybe. And that's quinacridone magenta. Pretty dark, so. Instead of lightening this whole pile, what I'm gonna do is scoop this all together because I want this, a step or two lighter, and I'll start with white here, and then I'll add that to the white. Now let's see where this is. And what I'm doing here is I kind of like the color that I see on my painting. So instead of matching the reference, I've just decided to kind of recreate. Finally mixed up. It's a little bit grayer than I would like. And I feel like a little more cobalt will just amp that up a touch. And I just decided to take that palette knife and just mush that color test right onto the board. And I might just palette knife the sky. So I'm just gonna take a giant blob. I'm gonna hold that up on my palette knife so you can see that on the palette cam. And then, oops, sorry about that. Camera. Very lavender next to that like teal blue, and I really love that combination. So I feel okay about this. And I want to have like some airiness at the top of this mark, so I'm just going to flick upward. And that just gives you the, like, one side's going to be a little bit more sharp and one side's going to be a little bit more broken up, right? The side that you release the pressure on and you let that pressure off the knife will definitely give you some like airy marks. Even lighter blue of the teal variety, the cobalt teal. I feel like color is just one of those things where like you have to have something that like sets off the color nearby. So I'm going to go for a little variation. You can really see how purple and pretty that lavender color is. Plus, it's a little lighter, so yeah, I think I like incorporating that. And I don't want to have like just one flat color for the sky because it's a bit boring. And like there's maybe times when it would work better for a picture if, you know, maybe the other parts of the picture supported that or it wasn't going to clash in terms of style. But I think for this particular piece, for the way that it's going so far, and also just because it's mine and that's kind of how I paint, I'm going to put some marks, some color variation, and a little palette knife. And actually, just covering ground on a large piece, the palette knife is great for that. And it's so fun. It's very forgiving too. You can really, to a point, you can kind of scrape off paint. Let's see if I can get this edge a little bit. Okay. Up this way. And honestly, like, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but the surface looks really good. It went from like underpainting to like definitely more refined and finished. I'm gonna put a few random marks in here. This may not be the last layer on it. This is a quick painting, but not that quick. I could definitely come back through. So let's get a little bit more ground covered. Okay, cool. I'm gonna just consolidate all of that extra color. It's gonna be super useful for something. The water, dulling down the orangey kind of rock colors, maybe. I don't know, but it's always useful to keep those colors around. So if we have some leftover, it'll be good for something. All right, next I want to do this mountain form. It looks so underdone just hanging out here against the sky and against this water that has so much more paint on it. It's so great to see that because that makes me think, you know, this is moving. This is coming along. This has definitely changed, and so has this. So now we're going to change this to catch up with those areas. And what I feel like I always start with is going to be from a logical choice. We're going to paint what's underneath first, and then we're going to paint what's on top of that second. So what's underneath is going to be this orangey ground earth color. It's going to be the green grass here. It's going to be like this little rocky shoreline color. And what's on top of all that is going to be the trees, which are very distant and are not green, even though you might think they're green. They are not. So first colors first, we're going to mix up the, do not like this palette knife at all, the incredibly bright yellow, which we are going to quickly dull that puppy down. And I'd like to have like some earth tones as well. This is yellow ochre and just a really intense, strong yellow when mixed with cadmium yellow medium. Here's burnt sienna. But instead of just adding that, I'm going to add a little bit of this like sky lavender color to the burnt sienna. Here we go. Now that sky lavender had some white in it. It made a gray. I don't want to darken my yellow color too much, okay? So it's important that whatever I add to that yellow is going to be about the right value, about the same value as the yellow. And that's not quite gray enough. Maybe it needs to be a little warmer too. A little more sienna. Oop, too much. That's okay. Now we have pink. And now you can see what happens when you ruin a color when you're mixing it. It does happen all the time. It's just the way it goes. We're just going to take a little, like, it's red essentially, really red. So let's mix green. And we will add that to the red, and we're back to gray. And this is still just the color that we're using to dull down our yellow. The gray is looking a lot more neutral to me than it was. So even though it kind of swung into like, whoops, this is now pink, I got it back so quickly that we just don't even need to worry about it. I do need a little more white though. You just step back from the painting for a second. So if you're like wondering what's with this radio silence, I just kind of have to like step back and remember to do that yourself. If you are working on a picture, it is really important to like not be all 6 inches from it the entire time. That's not how we're going to view pictures. So making sure to like take a little distance, take a little step back. All right, here we are again. We're going to dull this yellow down. We're going to take a much lighter color and a warmer. There we go. Here's like this nice neutral. See that neutral that I just spent forever mixing? That neutral, I think it's going to work really well. Let's take that down a notch. Pretty good. It definitely is duller. I think it might be a little on the green side. Okay. Just takes a few minutes. And honestly, this is 85% of your time. Oh, it's scientifically calculated. Just kidding. I was told 85% of your time spent mixing on the palette. And it's probably true. Warming up this color with a little quinacridone. I already like that color a lot now. I'm going to hold this up to the reference and just see kind of like, am I in the neighborhood? Just 1 second. All right. So here we have our, I warmed it up even more with just a little bit of a cadmium red. And I'm just going to go in here with this little brush and lay down some of this color. Again, I don't want to go so heavy with this paint that there is no chance I can paint over it, because I will be overlapping this at the edges, and I don't want to have a surface that's like really non-cooperative. I'm going to join this little bit together and kind of pull that land mass, I guess, like a little bit through here. We're just kind of simplifying these colors a touch. Maybe if I have time, we can go back. All right, so we talked a little bit about the color of those trees. Not green, actually. I feel like they are probably more like a slightly distant blue purple. And I am going to add a lot of red to neutralize. I did mix the green, but we're going to neutralize that with some quinacridone magenta. And I'm holding it up to my painting, and we're going to mix a little bit of that really electric blue kind of watercolor into it. And I love when you have a palette filled with colors that you can kind of work, you know, into other colors. You kind of want to use what's ever mixed on your palette to create more harmonies elsewhere. So recycling colors, it can result in mud. That's the downside. But if you're careful and if you're really intentional about what you actually put on the painting, I think you can achieve quite a bit of really nice color harmony that way. So let's see. I feel like for this color, I'm going to just thin down the paint with a little bit of turp because I want some texture and I want like something to look like a brush stroke. I already have like a nice lighter blue, so I want like instead of like one color in this whole area, I'm trying to leave a little bit transparent. And I also really like that the lighter blue marks could be the distant trees. I'm going to use them. We're going to see if we can preserve. Went the wrong way. Picked up some sky color. Okay. And I looked for a place to put down like a little bit of a more bold mark because I don't feel like everything back here needs to be light and airy. I feel like I'll balance that later with some thicker paint in the foreground. I sincerely hope so, or I'll have to now, I should say. So I did just adjust the color, and that is something I think a lot of times people are very frustrated by like, I can't mix the exact same color. And it is a really good exercise to have to mix the exact same color, but it is not something that you necessarily are going to benefit from if you apply that to working on a painting. So, yes, you should be able to because you should be able to mix any color that you can lay eyes on, essentially, or get as close as your palette will allow. However, what an opportunity missed because if you are just applying the exact same colors layer after layer, there's really no interest and no depth built up. In fact, it's kind of pointless to apply color in layers. You could just paint it flat. So, I think just getting, a little bit more free with your color and allowing it to have some variation and not feeling terribly limited because you can't mix or chose not to mix, I should say, that exact color that you started with. Now, this color, for example, I feel like it's a bit one note back here. So I'm just grabbing a few other ingredients that are like on my palette and I'm going a little lighter. I'm going a little more sky color. And I want to carry on with like some edges that could be trees, a little lighter. I don't think this had that nice underpainting kind of coincidentally. It had all these nice tree lines and shapes. So I kind of have to make my own at this stage. I have to kind of invent these marks, and if I'm lucky enough to like leave them in the first layer, that's great. But okay, so after this, we're gonna looking at the clock. This is a really interesting process, because like I said, I always do try and plan essentially how long I'm going to, stay on a painting. If it's approximately 10 hours, or I want to work on this about 5 times, or, whatever it is. Kind of think about how I want that to go. But this is a lot more precise, such a strict deadline ending at 3 p.m. So looking around at like what I have left to do, I have this blue on my brush still. And I noticed, just for the sake of efficiency, I'm kind of seeing like, are there other little bits I could throw in to just save myself time? I think there are. I want to emphasize a little at the base of this. And you could see how like this is where painting in layers is so helpful. Maybe I could make these marks and this variation by going back and forth between these two colors. And believe me, when I first started painting, that's what I would try to do. But it really does not need to be that way. We can make this quite a lot more simply when we kind of come into this with the idea of layering. It's very purple now. And I earlier, like kind of, I should have mentioned that I was painting the sky and I just had this brush stroke that like just obliterated the top part of that mountain. Whoops. That's okay. I'm going to try to fix that up now. And I noticed this kind of cool, I don't know, this like elliptical shape of dark rock that goes along the top of that. So maybe I can save what I accidentally destroyed and then make that a little stronger just by kind of focusing on those details. Okay. For now, that's going to be enough. And I haven't even mixed color for these, but I do think I'll just carry on with this little blue color. It's kind of serving the purpose, doing the job. Paint all the way to the edges. Oh, do I get myself into trouble by not painting all the way to the edges sometimes? And then you kind of have to go back and like Frankenstein everything together, like really tedious, and it's not part of the flow of the painting. And so that's a really easy place to like have it mess up. Stick with the flow of the painting. Keep going with that process. Don't leave little areas that you've not worked on at all while something else is finished. All of this process stuff has like so much of a bigger impact and a larger effect than you might think. It's pretty dramatic. So really stick with that process. Silence that phone really quick. All right. And actually, like for 15 minutes, I feel like I've made for like having 15 minutes left, I should say, fairly okay / fairly decent time. I see this little orangey, yellowy, warm color kind of underneath all this grassy stuff here. Very coastal situation. So I'm just going to scumble that through. Now, scumbling is when you have paint on your brush, but you're not trying to fully cover every fiber of the canvas. You're just letting those fibers kind of show by almost dry brushing across the tops of the canvas fibers. If you've done it correctly, you should see like either the canvas weave even more dramatically, or maybe a little bit of the color underneath. And I think that's really, like, I'm enjoying this for creating a sense of like form and movement in these planes. However, I do believe I've reached the end of the usefulness of that technique. So, time for more color mixing. Oops. That was not what I intended to do. I believe I've ruined quite a bit of white paint there, but don't mind me. I'll find a use for it anyway. All right, so this is another really good place to maybe think about doing like a little palette knife. And on these rocks, I'm gonna just, yeah, let's see what I can do. I don't wanna mix too carefully. Sometimes that's an intentional part of palette knife painting, is just to keep your palette knife covered in paint that's not thoroughly mixed. You might see that on there. I'm not sure. So let's see what we got. Like one side of it is like laying down a little purple mark, and the other side of it is laying down a very yellow mark. So that kind of works out. It gives you a really fun way to apply colors and have them be like a little bit more random and just not everything has to be planned and controlled. Like it's planned. I'm mixing intentional colors. I've got this area drawn in, but there's a certain part of it that is just, you can't really decide how it goes. It's going to go the way it goes. And if you can hear that sound, that little like flippy, whippy palette knifey sound, it is more satisfying than it sounds to paint that way. So make sure you get yourself a palette knife, fill it up with paint, get yourself a canvas, and just start scraping that paint across it. It's really fun. Okay. And, like I said, color variation, having random colors kind of incorporate into these marks, just mixing a little bit unevenly, it's a really good way to get that element of surprise and chance, even for yourself. And it is really fun when it works. Okay. I actually really like some of these marks, and hopefully they translate and you guys can see them, but cool. I got to figure out. I always like approach the painting and I'm like, which way does the palette knife feel like it needs to go? You can turn your palette knife. Kind of think about where it's loaded up and think about where it's going to put paint down. Smush that paint out to one edge, kind of pick it up. You can see I'm going to hold this up, I hope, to the camera. Oh, there it is. It's a little out of focus. Can't quite see from where I am, but you could see, maybe, I hope, that it's like thick on one side and thinner on the other. And that is really, going to give you the best results. I want a little more dark brown variation in here. I get this little ridge, maybe even darker, maybe even purple. For sure, purple. Like purple and brown are just natural together. Like a natural color combination that just seems like you see it quite often in nature, and it's one that just mixes so beautifully on the palette. Now, okay, that still needs some green, and we have 8 minutes, but that's all right. We're going to get it. So I feel like I'm going to take a little bit of this color and just do a few minutes before I go back into that last little land formation, because I want to relate what I was just doing to these colors on the ground plane here. So I'm kind of using the colors that I just had mixed as the base. And I added a little more like pink and a little bit of the cobalt blue. When I say pink, I usually mean quinacridone magenta, but how many syllables is that? I mean, we're going to say pink. That's pretty. Maybe a little dark. It looks so different on the palette, and then you put it on your painting, and it kind of just turns out to look like a different color. So I always think that when that happens, that's probably a good sign for your picture that you've effectively made a world in which colors actually look different when you put them into the painting. That's kind of cool. Oops, I just keep hitting that camera. Sorry about that. So I'm putting the painting, like the paint really smushed on the canvas, really thick right there. And then I come back across it and I push that out. Okay, so let me try that again. So hopefully I didn't block the camera. I really want to get as much use out of this color because I think it is a very useful color as I possibly can. Going to the sides. Okay, did I miss it anywhere? Can we use it anywhere? Oh, here's a few places I might be able to. Man, that was a lucky one. There's some really fun moments of just pure luck in palette knife painting. And I've talked about it before today. If an area feels like it needs fixing and it's messed up, you know, try not to. Try to just move elsewhere, fix something else, move along, and then come back to it. Don't overdevelop an area. I think that's more important than keeping everything fixed. Okay, let's get into, there's like 5 minutes, but I already did some palette knife in the, I'm going to call it the water. Let's do this little land formation here. And that's very light, very yellowy, but I don't want it that strong, so I'm just using a little of that purple that I've already mixed for 18 million reasons. It looks a little green. Well, no, I actually like it. See how it goes on. Big chunk of paint on the surface is such a fun opportunity. It really is, because then you could just take that knife and just flick that out, make a little texture. Up. I have to do this all at once. Better to come back through and lay off a little bit. I'm thinking like the planes of these rock formations, and they're very clear to see. You know, I mean, you could see literal lines coming down this way and coming across. So, you know, use them, make some marks that sort of look like them. A little darker, it's a little shadowy, textured. All right, and while I have this lovely pile of yellow right next to this lovely pile of blue, I am now going to make a teensy little bit of a green grass color because I never did, and I kind of need it. Because I think visually that's sort of what's missing. And maybe that's where I will focus just for a minute. And again, I'm going to scumble the paint. Scumble. Here we go. Let's see, what brush do I want? I want this to be a smallish brush. A yellowy green. All right. And I just want to put a few marks through because when we think about like how the eye travels through the painting, often it is just literally following a path of a color. So finding a color that you can use to kind of move through different areas of the picture, that is a really good way to reinforce the composition, create a little depth. Whew. Wasn't that fun and exciting? All right. See. Ooh, dark marks in the water are going to soon, thank you, Elaine. I'm going to soon follow that with light marks in the water. I didn't quite get to it today, and we are just about out of time. We might have like one more quick little minute because, you know, I can always squeeze out one more minute. One more minute. Now, what am I actually mixing for? You could ask me, but I couldn't say. So I'm going to guess. I think I was mixing for this little dark area. I know it was a dark color. I know it was for over here. So this is what I mean. Like, so much of it is really just intuition. Like, you don't consciously think about each and every single thing that you're doing the entire painting process. But to get to that point, I think you have to think about a lot of things a lot of the time. And if you're starting out wondering what the most important of those things is, it is definitely the process and definitely working from general to specific, I believe. All right, so I said a few times what my plan was today, and I just about followed it and I just about completed it. And that's kind of all I'm going to ask for from myself today. So, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to like and subscribe and follow and share it and comment on it and, you know, all the above. I don't know, whatever you can do.